I learned here, as a child, standing matters, but who you stand among, that matters even more. At services with my parents up in that balcony, I was very attuned to when the congregation sat and when we stood. Sitting, I drifted off into my own thoughts, but standing was a communal call to attention. Standing for the shofar, the whole congregation leaning forward, awaiting the sound to break. Standing for the confessional, hundreds rising together, voices falling heavy. Standing for the Shema, a chorus proudly declaring one God, one creation, one humanity. Then at 15, a gaping absence besides me and my mother. After my father died, I stood for the first time for Kaddish. I felt grateful that there was some kind of acknowledgement that my Yom Kippur was not the same, that nothing would ever be the same. But unlike other standing moments, this one felt awkward, isolating. When Rabbi Davidson became our senior rabbi, he changed the way that we stand for Kaddish. First, those in recent mourning stand. Then those who are observing a yard site join them. And finally, the whole congregation stands, and we offer the prayer together. Now, when I stand for Kaddish as a mourner or as a comforter, I think about what it teaches our children. No one carries grief alone. At Temple Emanu-El, we rise not only for Jewish members of our immediate family, but for all who are part of our congregational family in some way. A non-Jewish relative, a cousin, a friend, someone dear to a member of our staff. If you have suffered loss, you belong in this prayer. If you wish to support others in their grief, you belong in this prayer. Here in this Jewish home, we stand together. Variations of this practice are now part of Reform ritual. Other movements offer Kaddish differently. They may draw stricter lines. Who counts as a mourner? Who counts as a Jew? Which relationships are recognized? Now, some Jews don't feel comfortable rising unless they're personally in mourning. And some widen the circle by praying for peace to descend not only on us and all Israel, but on all who dwell on earth. Now, this is not only about Kaddish, it's about something deeper. Judaism has always existed within the interplay of two truths, particularism and universalism. We are a distinct family, and we are part of the human family. This one morning ritual reflects a wider and continual discernment about where to set the boundaries of belonging, identity, and responsibility. I saw this most vividly when I met Chaim. He grew up in the Ger Hasidic sect, one of the most insular corners of Jewish life. Growing up, he never talked to a non-Jew or any person outside of his community. He rarely left the neighborhood, and he only spoke Yiddish. Ironically, it was Israel that opened his world. As a teenager in yeshiva, he met Bedouins, foreign workers, and the closest friend he made? A Southern Baptist airline attendant. The experience was life-changing. In Chaim's words, growing up, we were taught that non-Jews were intrinsically lesser than we are, corrupt, dangerous, not smart. Then I met them, and they were human just like me. And that shattered my faith. Because if Judaism depends on denying other people's humanity, it cannot be true. Back in Brooklyn, Chaim outwardly remained in his community, but inwardly he had already crossed borders. In time, he reached out to several Reform congregations, simply hoping to speak with a Reform Jew, any Jew that was different than him, and that's how he found me. We met regularly, and he discovered a wider Jewish world. Jews who pray differently, who love differently, who build families differently. People who his community had degraded and dismissed. He heard a new Jewish message. You are welcome here. You belong. This Judaism restored his faith. Chaim's story connects to something much larger, the birth of Reform Judaism itself. When the Enlightenment swept through Europe with its scientific discoveries, universal values, and ideals of human rights, it ignited Jews. Many realized they could not remain in a Judaism that denied these truths. Staying would have meant giving up the chance to walk through university gates, to enter the professions opening before them, to serve on city councils, to join cultural salons. It would have meant sitting apart from their spouses and their children during the holiest days of the year and reciting prayers that contradicted reason and science, spoken in a language they did not understand. Some left Judaism altogether. Many more would have, but a new Judaism emerged, one that embraced tradition even as it welcomed the opportunities and insights of the age, one that chose to live in close partnership with people of other backgrounds. It was painful for me to write this sermon, missing the long, long, long discussions I would have had and the many, many, many edits I would have received from my friend and teacher, Rabbi David Ellenson, professor of modern Jewish thought and chancellor emeritus of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the Reform Movement Seminary. Few people thought about this topic more broadly and deeply. So I'm going to bring him to this moment. As he explained, the universalistic ideology of modernity led to the emancipation of the Jews. The Jews, in turn, started to stress the universalistic elements in their tradition. After all, these elements allowed Jews to participate fully in the modern West. In short, to be a Reform Jew is to be authentic and modern at once. These words are not abstract to me. I see them brought to life every time I walk through the 8th floor hallway to my study, and I pass the portraits of Temple Emanu-El's past senior rabbis. They're life-size, and they sit high on the walls, encouraging all who walk by to lift their gaze and stand taller. These portraits provide a glimpse into an enduring challenge: how to live as a distinct people within the wider circle of humanity. Here are 3 examples, all from the 19th century. Rabbi David Einhorn's commitment to equality was both moral and theological. In his prayer book, he erased most references to Jews as the chosen people and all references to a personal Messiah. He publicly denounced slavery at a time when many colleagues and congregants supported it. In 1861, preaching from his pulpit in Baltimore, a riot broke out in response, and he fled, a pro-slavery mob threatening to tar and feather him. Rabbi Kaufman Kohler was a leading author of the Reform Movement's 1885 Pittsburgh Platform, one of the most influential documents in shaping modern Judaism. He moved Shabbat to Sunday to echo the rhythms of life in America. But as anti-Semitism rose, he reversed himself, and he moved it back to Saturday. When Jews are cast to the margins, we assert what makes us distinct. Rabbi Gustav Gottheil pushed boundaries in every direction. He introduced one of the first English prayer books, including adaptations of Christian hymns. He was also one of the earliest Reform rabbis to support Zionism. That drew condemnation from colleagues who feared it betrayed American loyalty, and from Orthodox leaders who believed only the Messiah could establish a Jewish state. When religious school students come to visit my study, they always pause in the hallway, so I stop with them and I ask, "What do you notice?" Usually, one of them says something like this: "If they had wizard hats and wands, this could be Hogwarts." The Harry Potter references always make us laugh, but they point to something important that we shouldn't take for granted. Our students are drawing connections between their Jewish identity and their larger world. That's what our rabbis did in their time, reading works by Goethe and Kant alongside studying Torah and Talmud. For them, it was a radical act. Because of them, it is now a natural impulse for our children. How blessed we are. Now, there is one thing that every class notices. There are no women on the wall. And they're right. Those portraits tell an important story, but it's not the whole story. And that's when I tell them that Mark Wilner, my teacher 50 years ago and theirs today, had us memorize the New Colossus, the poem engraved into the Statue of Liberty, written by Emma Lazarus. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." This poem marks a turning point for Lazarus. Born into a wealthy Sephardic family with roots reaching back to the colonial era, she was immersed in the secular literary world of Emerson and Longfellow. Judaism was a shadow in her distant background. In one of her rare early poems on Jewish themes, she described the Thoreau Synagogue in Newport not just as a physical space, but as a symbol of a faith that felt irrelevant to her acculturated life in the modern world. No signs of life are here. The very prayers inscribed around are in a language dead. The light of the perpetual lamp is spent, that an undying radiance was to shed. For her, Judaism was not a living religion. Her outlook changed when she met Rabbi Gustav Gottheil of Temple Emanu-El. He urged Lazarus to learn Hebrew and to translate medieval hymns for his new English prayer book. She hired a teacher from Temple Emanu-El and began studying. A spark was lit. And as Lazarus drew more deeply into her Jewish identity, she became more awake to the suffering around her and more determined to respond. Gottheil brought her to see the plight of thousands of Russian Jewish immigrants arriving on Ward's Island, which stirred her to action. She volunteered with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and helped build the Hebrew Technical Institute in New York. She lifted her voice for all who sought refuge, even crossing the ocean, to join the work of social reform in Europe. And she gifted our nation a poem of radical hospitality, words etched into the American conscience. For Chaim, Reform Judaism restored the faith of someone raised in the tightest particularism. For Lazarus, it restored the faith of someone adrift in the broadest universalism. Together, they remind us that the vitality and strength of our movement, of the modern Judaism that grew from our movement, it lies in the fluidity between these two poles. Now, I don't tell all of this to the kids, but I do point out that while only portraits of men greet them on the 8th floor, it is the words of a Jewish woman that have welcomed millions to the shores of our nation. And she was once a student of Temple Emanu-El, just like they are. The portraits in our hallway remind us that to be a modern rabbi is to wrestle with tradition and change, with politics and principle, with the questions of the age, and then to speak, and then to act, even and perhaps especially when that may cause discomfort. Your clergy, who sit in the studies behind these portraits, take this responsibility seriously. Everything we do and everything we say is guided by a profound commitment to strengthen Judaism and the Jewish people. And there is no single way to do that. Each word and each choice comes with tremendous care and thoughtful exchange, and often with aching hearts. We grow because of each other. We debate, we challenge, we listen, we reconsider. Sometimes with passion, always with respect. But one truth is never questioned. Every person is of equal worth. Whatever else may change, this does not. Humanity was created as B'Tselem Elohim in God's divine image. Now, this may sound obvious, but I fear we are losing sight of this truth. An American colleague told me that her congregation and a neighboring Palestinian American community planned a shared memorial for the children who had so far perished in the Gazan war. They decided to have posters with the pictures and names of 10 Israeli victims and 10 Palestinian victims. As the organizers were setting up, one of the Palestinian women said, "Can we cover the children's names on these posters?" Looking at them, I feel my grief swaying more to the ones with Arabic names. If I just look at their faces, they're all my children. Ideally, we would feel equal compassion for all who suffer. But this woman's honesty reminds us that sometimes we feel more for ourselves. Our confessional prayers today caution us to work against the pull of extreme particularism when our hearts fall short. I shared this story at a Jewish gathering. There was a pause. And then a person confessed, "I carry so much shame and anger about Israel's actions in the war. I think if I was at that memorial, my grief would also sway more toward the children with Arabic names. Shame on me." And trying so hard to prove that we are no better than anyone else, sometimes we end up believing others are somehow more deserving than we are, that our grief matters less, that their suffering matters more. This woman's honesty shows how extreme universalism can morph into a twisted particularism. We must stay alert. When love or sorrow or fear or fury cause us to value one life above another, Judaism calls us to resist. And when we can't change how we feel, we are expected to control how we speak, and how we act. Everyone must be treated equally and with respect. This is demanded by Jewish tradition, by human decency, by American principles of democracy, by Israel's Declaration of Independence. These values are strong. They have sustained nations and generations, but they are not indestructible, and today they are eroding. In the public schools of Texas and the public squares of Israel, we are seeing that tribalism is not confined to extremism. In Texas, a new law requires the 10 Commandments to be displayed in every classroom. The state's Attorney General made the intent clear. Children will be taught Christian theology as the truth and Christian prayer as best practice. This is the danger of religious particularism in the hands of power, faith reduced to dogma and imposed as law. And in Israel, my friend is one of the many thousands of Israeli citizens who regularly attend anti-war protests. Recently, she carried a sign shaped like the tablets of the 10 Commandments with the words, Lo tirtzach, thou shalt not kill. It was confiscated by the police. Thou shalt not kill. Taken away in the very state founded as both Jewish and democratic. This is what happens when messianic ideology infects a government. Even the most basic of God's commandments, to safeguard life, is treated as a threat. Sects like the one Chaim left reject modernity's universal values, but these supremacist claims are no longer confined to ultra-Orthodox yeshivas. They are being spoken and acted upon around the globe by government officials, by people with power, by people who impact our lives. Consider, for example, Knesset member Miki Zohar, who has made a series of exceptionalist claims. Unequivocally, what flows in the DNA of the Jewish people is something special. The Jewish race is the highest human capital, the smartest, the most comprehending. We need to lift up the voices of Israeli leaders and leaders around the world who urgently and tirelessly push against this. In Israel, those who defend the values of modern Zionism, leaders who draw the line between faith and fanaticism. When lawmakers claim that no one in Gaza is innocent, Reform Rabbi and Knesset member Gilad Kariv decried it as a desecration of Torah and of Israel's ethical core. And he warned, words like this seep into a nation's psyche and clear the path for immoral actions. Our Torah could have begun with the Jewish story, starting with Abraham and Sarah entering into eternal covenant with God and founding a nation. Instead, it begins with creation, a text reflecting the Shema, one God, one creation, one humanity. Before we are Jews, we are human beings. To believe otherwise, to suggest that as Jews we are different from everyone else by the very nature of who we are and not because of the tradition that shapes us or the history we share, that echoes the very ideologies of our worst enemies, past, present, and future. God invites Abraham and Sarah to walk in covenant, a covenant binding people throughout time and space, while weaving their story into the fabric of humanity. We accepted, and ever since we have been learning to live it, and it is not an easy task. Covenant requires us to choose curiosity over certainty, to resist the lure of simple answers and simple images. And it calls us to build, to shape a Judaism that is wise and compassionate, that speaks to the world as it is and to the world as it could be. That's why Rabbi Michael Marmer, eulogizing Rabbi David Ellenson, urges us, let's prefer nuance and mess to slogans and messianism. Let's make this a Judaism that is humane, urbane, germane. Abraham and Sarah journeyed forth with their whole household, including those who were not part of their kin. Generations later, we set out from Egypt as an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude joined by Egyptians and others who were also refusing Pharaoh's tyranny. And finally, poised on the threshold of the promised land, the words of Moses ring out like a shofar blast, echoing from the Torah this morning. You stand here this day, all of you, leaders and laborers, young and old, men and women, Israelites and non-Israelites, you who are here and you who are not here. When he says you, he means us. Moses is speaking to every one of us, to every sacred soul who is a part of this moment, who is a part of the global Jewish community in some way. Those of every generation and gender, those who are Jewish and those who are not, members and guests, those whose daily work sustains this community and those sustained by it, those who will one day stand in these pews, and those who we will always rise to remember. We stand here today, all of us, because every one of us matters, and that is what matters most of all. Ken Yehi Ratzon.